want to kind of take us where you've updated the workbook since last meeting?
So this is water only that we're talking about, I believe, today. I spent some time between the last meeting and this meeting trying to get a better handle on the number of bills that we're going to use to calculate the ready-to-serve charge. We were kind of blindly assuming a round number of 20,000 with the last version of the workbook. And I spent some time with the data set that we've been working with to come up with a number that I was more comfortable with. That number is over 23,000 actually, so it's a little bit higher than 20,000. I'll show you some specifics around that number in a moment. But that has allowed us to get at a ready-to-serve charge calculation that we're a little bit more comfortable with for the reason already mentioned. Instead of just blindly guessing a number, we actually have a number that is based on the data set that we've been working on. So that's in here, meaning we're using that number to calculate the ready-to-serve charge, and we're using that number to calculate projected revenue, as well from the ready-to-serve charge. Beyond that, the only other thing that is in the workbook that wasn't last time is the addition of reserves. We had talked briefly during last meeting that there was a targeted reserves amount of $200,000 because $100,000 for, I believe, the operating side and $100,000 for the capital side, knowing that targeting a lower reserve amount compared to wastewater made sense based on the fact that it's smaller financial operation water is, and also the system is newer and less likely to need emergency repair, or emergency maintenance, I should say. So that is in here as well. So that has raised the cost for FY20 and FY21 by $100,000. We have included those first 2 years so that it's worked into the rate calculations here. Beyond that, I know we discussed how we should start taking a look at breaking out the determination of rates for the in-city users versus the out-of-city users versus the Breezewood users.
Matt, before you go on to that, just for the guys at the table, I mean, are we comfortable with 2 chunks of 100,000 the first 2 years? I know on wastewater we strung it out over a little long period of time because we were collecting a lot more. I mean, we could do 50 a year for 4 years, or right now we've plugged it in at 100,000 a year for 2 years.
And I assume that was based, quite frankly, on your best judgment.
What
and I think that's, in the absence of anything else, that's the best.
Start there.
At the moment,
Sure.
we should start there.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Matt.
No, that's a good point. I didn't even consider that. I just assumed 100,000 because that's what we're using for wastewater as a yearly amount to contribute to the reserves, but it doesn't have to be 100,000. We could definitely lighten it a little bit if we wanted to.
Yep.
Over a longer time period.
Right. When I was dreaming this thing up, at 2 a.m, I was thinking we'd do it over the period of our first increment. So if we're going to use a 4-year period, we'd spread it over that period. But that was just totally, out of the air. There wasn't a whole lot of conscious thought that went into it. But we can see, we now have the ability to look at it multiple ways, which I think is what we really wanted anyway.
Yeah, it's a simple change in this workbook if we wanted to see the impact of changing it. But for now, I guess we'll just leave it as is.
Yeah, we'll leave it like it is, and we'll just see the impacts.
Yep. So for the other rates, so currently the way that the rate schedule works on the water side, the in-city rate is what it is, and then the city charges out-of-city users twice that amount, and the city charges Breezewood users 1.5 times that amount. So we started talking about maybe seeing what things might look like if we start breaking that out in the analysis here. So in the interest of time, I didn't really have too much of an opportunity to start breaking things out. But then also I started thinking, well, what if I take a stab at it and it's not really what the group wants? That would be time that may be wasted. So instead what I did was I kind of came up with a very loose methodology that could be used and I've kind of typed it up in an Excel spreadsheet I'm about to show you so everyone can see it on the screen. And I just thought that made sense, at least for today, to talk about, methodology. And if the group can at least, get comfortable with something, then I could then work on getting into the workbook to see what the numbers tell us. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and show you this other workbook, this other file I was talking about. Let's ignore this for right now. I'm going to hide that so you can't see it. But this shows you some data that I've kind of pulled together to show you how I got at the 23,000-ish bills. What I did was I broke it out by, these are your class codes. So right here, this is the in-city area. 51 through 55. 51 represents the smallest meter size. So your quarterly bill, your quarterly accounts. 52 represents the next size up, which is
Inch and a half.
1.5 inch meters. 53 is 2-inch meters. 54 is 3-inch meters, and 55 is 4-inch meters and larger. So this column here is going to show you the number of accounts with each of those. And this, again, this is in our data set, so this goes back a little bit further. It's not necessarily reflective of the current account structure, the current list of accounts. This is based on the data set that we've been looking at, which is October 2016 to September 2017. So here are the number of accounts with each of those class codes. And if I hold this up, that's 2,500-ish for in-city accounts. This is the out-of-city, more accounts, almost 2,700 accounts total. And then here are your Breezewood, obviously a much smaller number. Okay. Now Breezewood, it seems that all Breezewood users only have 1-inch meters, or I guess they could be smaller than 1-inch meters, but the smallest class code for all of Breezewood, which I think means that they're all billed quarterly.
That's correct, and it's purely a residential neighborhood. If it was outside of the Breezewood designation, they'd be hitting that out-of-city 2x rate.
Yep. So then this column represents the number of bills for each of those groupings, and simply it's straightforward math. Anything that has a 1 for a charge code, for a class code, is being assumed that they have quarterly bills, so that's multiplied by 4. Whereas for these, I guess I got rid of my formulas in this table, but anything else is multiplied by 12, assuming that they're monthly accounts. All right? And then we total it up at the bottom, and that's how we get the 23,072. So I was pretty comfortable with this number. Once I came up with it, it made sense to me. I ran it quickly by Kevin and Bert. I don't think Bert has chimed in yet, but Kevin thought that made sense to him as well. So we're moving forward with that in our analysis for now. And then also what I wanted to do was to quickly take a look at the revenue piece. It's really the billings piece, because there's what's billed and then there's what's collected. But this is what's billed based on that same data set. So this is your in-city amount, about $680,000. This is your out-of-city amount, just over $1 million. And here's your Breezewood, much smaller amount, 41,000-ish. And then percentages that represent each of those. So you can see for the in-city, you're about 38% of the total billings revenue is in-city users. Out-of-city is about 60%, and Breezewood's about 2. Any questions or comments on this so far?
No, and I think that's reasonable, Bert, right? Those are in the ranges we would have expected to see.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I guess let's get a little more aggressive about how this might work. All right. So again, I just came up with a methodology. I typed it up. This was just kind of, off the top of my head, something that I thought might work, and also something that would kind of approach city currently does, but by no means does it have to be what happens here. It's just an idea at this point. Okay? So basically I took a similar structure from what we've been using in our regular workbook and presented it here, but really with the caveat that we have to figure out how we're going to balance the different groups. So the in-city users versus the out-of-city users versus the Breezewood users. So the first step would be to determine the revenue requirement for water rates and ready to serve. This is what we do today in the workbook, and also on the wastewater side. We basically say here are the costs. Here is the revenue that we can expect from other revenue sources. Back that out. There are any reserves, like on the wastewater side for the sewer surcharges, for example, we're backing that up. We may apply some surplus from a prior year. We may do that. But ultimately, we get at a revenue requirement that we are targeting with rates and the ready to serve. And that's basically what we're trying to recover. So that's what this table represents right here, this little small table. This is FY20 that I pulled out of the water workbook. So we're trying to recover a total cost of about $1.7 million. And they're broken out as fixed and non-fixed right here based on those allocations that we've looked at prior. So one thing we could do is I took the approach that maybe just determine what the city's portion of that might be, and it's solely based on this billings number that's up here. See that percentage right there is the same.
Mm-hmm.
So basically determine what might be just the city's portion of that, and it's based on historical data, of course, but that's what I'm doing here. So these numbers here represent about 38% of these numbers. Okay? And then as we do, well, this isn't going to work now that I think about it. Hang on. That ready to serve is the total amount that we would expect. So, hang on. I suppose we would have to take a portion of that as well. One second. Explains why my first attempt at reconciling didn't make sense. This makes more sense.
Kevin, while he's doing that, just want to remind us what the fixed and the non-fixed are.
So the fixed, again, looking at it from what we need to do the increase production in the summertime. So the fixed would be everything that's we would need for a year-round kind of usage, and then the non-fixed would be the surge or that delta we need to be able to produce because of the summertime peak.
So fixed and non-fixed gets at peak and non-peak.
Correct. Yes.
That's better. Okay. So what I was doing there was I was backing out the total ready to serve. Total ready to serve would be all account.
Okay.
I didn't think that made sense as I just looked at it a moment ago. And now what I'm doing is I'm basically assuming a portion of that would be applied to the city's amount of cost to recover or revenue requirement. So that this number here that I've highlighted is the 40%, just the 38%-ish portion of the total amount to expect from the ready to serve in FY20. So the total amount of all accounts, which would be out of city, Breezewood, if we apply to those accounts the same ready to surcharge, which actually I guess is something that should be discussed too. But let's assume that it's the same for all of them. We would expect just north of $300,000 in revenue in 1 year, really in FY20 to start. So we're not going to back out all 300,000 here. We're going to have to back out just a portion that would apply just to the city users.
Okay.
So that's what I'm doing here. That's why I changed the number down from about 300,000 down to what you see now, which is about $117,000. So that 117, usually we reduce the fixed cost by that. So that's why this number here is lower. And these are your new revenue requirement or rates only. We've already backed out ready to serve. We don't have to worry about that at the moment. So these are the rates that would be calculated just for in-city based on the total flow, the total flow and the peak flow. That's the same methodology that's been used. So these rates right here are targeted to recover those costs. Okay? So this right here would represent in-city only. And then if you wanted to go ahead and continue to use some multiplier, then you would simply just take this and then here we have a double. Here for Breezewood we have a 1.5%. Just, 1.5 times the amount of the in-city. Alright. Now I haven't done any type of reconciliation to see if, if in the end this would recover what we're targeting it to recover. But if this made some semblance of sense to the group, then I would go ahead and do that. And then also another thing that we could do instead of this approach, which is simply just kind of blindly doubling up the rates and here 1.5%. I'm sorry, 1.5 times the rate. Maybe we do a similar calculation for all of them. And right here, if I highlight this group, this area right here of my spreadsheet, this is trying to come up with a cost-based in-city rate, which is what we've done with wastewater, and that everyone seems to be happy with that. Does it make sense to, instead of just multiplying out of city by a factor, multiplying Breezewood by a factor, that we do a similar calculation like I've highlighted here, targeting a certain cost just for out of city and a certain cost for Breezewood. So we could take that approach as well.
Thoughts?
So anyway, that's something I kind of loosely came up with. It kind of made sense to me at a high level, but again, it hasn't been reconciled. But I wanted to see what the group thought, and if I can get some semblance of direction on this, and I'll go ahead and start putting stuff like this into the workbook so we can see what it looks like.
Do we know what would be the factor that would cause the results to be different by breaking it out that way as opposed to just doing the multiplier? What would cause the change in the result?
I'm sorry, I didn't really hear that. Can you repeat that?
Yeah, Matt, this is Bruce. What factors would go into making the results from doing that exercise of, instead of doing the multiplier, doing it based on the costs? What would give a different result?
You're saying what type of effort would go into that? Is that the question?
No, what would give a different bottom line for the out of city and Breezewood if we did what you were just saying we could do, which was to, instead of just doing the multiplier, do the same thing that we did for the in-city based on the out-of-city costs?
So what impact would it have on the bottom line? Is that the question?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that we would see a very similar result, I believe, to what we've seen on the wastewater side, which is a fair to, I was going to say moderate. I don't even think moderate's the right word, but a relatively small surplus on a yearly basis. Because it's really ultimately the same methodology that's being used. You're targeting specific costs, you're setting a rate based on those costs, and because because that peak flow is in that calculation, you're actually projected to recover more than what the costs are saying, from what the costs are. So I would expect the same result in the end if we were to use the approach that I've highlighted here for all three areas.
Kip.
Yep.
Matt, I have a question, based on your question. The methodology we used on the wastewater side, and for us in Rehoboth on the water side, was where we knew, to the best of experts, Kevin and the consultants, as to the caliber and the future risks associated with, quote, the system. Now, in the case of going outside the city, we're dealing with infrastructure where, at least based so far on what we've talked about, we don't seem to have, it appears based on what I've been told and what I'm seeing, based on all the data, we don't really know to the same degree of surety or knowledge that we have inside Rehoboth as to what the situation of the external infrastructure is. And then if the external infrastructure does have issues, who's picking up the tab? Now in Rehoboth Beach, if things go south in some particular capability within the jurisdiction, our taxes go up in order to help support it. In the external jurisdictions, as opposed to Tidewater, which is a regulated public utility, as you can see the difference in their rates. I mean, they're already assuming rates that take into account their profitability, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess the first question is, what's our liability going forward? Do we really know that, or is there a degree of confidence that the external folks that we provide for, that the system's in pretty good shape? If it's in pretty good shape and comparable to Rehoboth from what we know, then it becomes a question of what should the multiplier be from a competitive standpoint or just from tradition, for lack of a better philosophy. But I think we need to, it would be helpful for me to understand what the hell's the status of the infrastructure. And I don't know if there is an answer to that at the moment, or.
So we do have an assessment that was done as part of the asset management report. It was included in there. You just have to really zoom in on the map so you can see the mains that are outside of town. And then those are had mainly been evaluated based on age and I guess construction material. They have not been assessed for condition really in that report. It was mainly based on age more than anything else. So and even less in Breezewood, because a lot of times Breezewood had built it, and they kind of tell us sometimes after the fact that, oh, you know, I need a hookup because I put this new main in at a gross exaggeration level. But we have better details, I think, in town, just because we have used it more, been more familiar with it, and done more work ourselves in town. So there is, I think, a little bit more risk associated with, especially in North Shores, because we just know without doing much research that a lot of it is underwater, and it's going to be harder to maintain, and the meter pits are always flooded, and those kinds of things.
Well, I think in that, which again, it's based on expert judgment, is if there's the anticipation of that based on age, then it would seem that incrementally more has to be incorporated into the capital cost potential to reserve for that, basically, to provide a little bit higher reserves because the risks are higher. If that's not collectively felt by the experts, then I would defer. But at least at the moment, particularly in North Shores, that seems to be a risk factor. And if it's only been based on age and not based on an actual reasonable inspection via video or whatever, sometimes a 1-inch pipe is only a 1/2 inch and a 4-inch pipe is only 1.5 inch. So it's a serious issue.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, I would agree there needs to be some accounting for that because there is more risk associated.
It would be strictly an arbitrary factor at the moment unless we had more data. But it may be reasonable in the context. If I looked at Tidewater's rates as sort of a boundary condition, which are really high, But if I dropped off from that, it may need to be more, not for just the protection of the people that we're serving outside the city, but for the protection of the people that are in the city, because if something goes wrong, except based on the contractual agreements, we may be on the hook, and I don't know if that's been fully evaluated yet. Because if we're on the hook, that's problematic.
I think as best we know, we are, right, Bert, as far as.
Well, I'm not gonna give a legal opinion, but
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
we're responsible for maintaining and providing service to the people
Right.
outside of town.
So
Go ahead, Bruce.
I'm tempted to say it kind of turns on its head what I was thinking about before your question, which, because I was trying to get at, what's the difference between the two methodologies? What's it going to result in? And thinking about the cost, taking the outside the city costs and then doing the analysis. The costs don't really represent the potential cost. And so it's almost like, it's almost more valid to say, well, based on the potential risk, what do we think the multiplier should be?
So try to look at what our expected operations and maintenance and CIP costs are in the out years based upon miles of pipe or number of service connections or some other mechanism. Although that won't account. You still have to lump like the big ticket items. The well systems themselves would have to get spread across everybody. But maybe the pipe rehab, pipe assessment kind of costs, pipe maintenance kind of costs, maybe we could do that based on mile of pipe, for instance, as opposed to something else.
Mile of pipe and age of pipe?
That would be pretty tough.
Yeah, because otherwise, I think you face the risk of exactly what we're trying to avoid on the sewer side when we did the whole thing is you really don't want surprises. I mean, the city doesn't want surprises a few years out where you say, holy crap, we didn't plan on that. Now, you can't plan for everything, but at least you can do it based on the best engineering judgment that you have and come up with a rational pricing model that is fair and equitable across everybody. Whether it ends up, after we do the calculation backwards, if it ends up being 1.5, 2.3, 3.3, whatever, or it gets linearized out, I think the approach we took on wastewater, which is a fully absorbed cost model, is totally applicable here for us within the city and totally applicable for those outside the city, because it ends up being fair and equitable across the board. But we've got an unknown quantity at the moment externally that we're what was history is prologue. Whatever happened, happened. But now we're going forward, and what's the best estimate we can give that also protects those people in those areas? Because I'm sure they'd be upset too if suddenly the entire system went to hell.
And the city said, oops, sorry, we didn't count on that. We're gonna take care of ourselves first.
Yeah.
We'll get to you when we get to you.
Those numbers are in the operations and maintenance costs. I mean, they're factored in there. Minus, I think, probably the risk piece of it. Greasewood's a little newer than the city, so maybe they're better than the city. So maybe you give them a break. North Shore's not quite as confident about it, so.
I mean, what I was hearing based up all along, at least up until this meeting, at the moment, was there were issues in the other two areas that might come back to bite us. And that's really what I'm trying to assess.
Sure.
If there's, we need to think about it. And just because facts are ignored, they may not, they still exist. So in this particular case, is there any factual basis to assume there may be some issues? And if there are, we don't want to have surprises so that everyone gets to see things in a nice, reasonable fashion.
Hey, Matt.
Yeah?
You've established these rates, or you've created this rate structure based upon a cost recovery approach. That's fair to say, right? Plus a small contingency at the bottom line when everything's done.
Yeah.
What it does, I just want to give you your focus is on the water and sewer issues. But on a broader scale, the actual results of the water fund have produced substantial surpluses over the years. And if it's decided that we're no longer going to enjoy those surpluses, it's going to, and that's not your problem really, it's I guess more of an elected official problem. But we've already established that the wastewater plant, because of the debt service associated with it, it's not going to produce the kind of surpluses that it had in past years. And if we set the rates for the water only based on a cost recovery objective with a small surplus, it's going to result in major implications for the city's general fund and operations, because those costs, which were previously covered by water and sewer, are going to have to be covered by the city's general fund, and more specifically, probably the taxpayers.
I think if we follow kind of the philosophy we did on the sewer side, is we're coming up with the number that we recommend in order to balance the books. If the Board of Commissioners wants to say we need to maintain a profit center to help pay some of our other expenses, then we can set that, and we have the latitude with this workbook to put an extra 10 cents on whatever, to come up with what their comfort level is if they want to do that. But I think we were targeting balance the books.
Yeah, I understand that, but I want to bring that up because it's not a small impact. We're talking about a major amount of revenue that your general fund's going to have to produce, going as far as the eye can see.
Right. But we didn't have that. We don't know what those numbers are. And so our charter was, I think, to kind of balance the books, and then if we want to use one or both of those profit centers to help pay down some of the general fund items, then they'll have that data to be able to do that.
Well, that's right, and one can get a pretty good idea by looking at previous audit reports and see what the surpluses were in water and sewer, and give you a pretty good idea of the kind of money you're talking about.
Bert, I've got a question related to that. When you say basically it would transfer the costs from the ratepayers to the taxpayers, what's the difference between the two in terms of the people involved?
Well, the taxpayers are in the city limits of Rehoboth. The ratepayers are in a larger district.
Right.
So essentially, we were running an enterprise fund. It's a business fund, and it produced surpluses. And now we're going to wipe those out and tell the city of Rehoboth taxpayers that they're going to have to figure out what sources of revenue they want. And you've got about 6 major sources of revenue in your general funds. Something has to go up, and some of those are user fee based, so you don't really have control over them. Another big one is transfer tax, which is subject to macroeconomic. So you kind of narrow it down to the point where who does it hit? And I'm not a genius, but I can tell you that the big target is probably the Rehoboth taxpayer.
So if there were a way of kind of fixing that while staying with the same methodology, it would be consider a different multiplier for out of town.
Well, maybe not a different multiplier, but maybe a different rate. I mean, factor in a rate that provides for a higher level of return, and I think you might be able to justify that or by looking at the amount of investment in the water and sewer facilities and maybe justify, higher rate. And
As you say, from a purely accounting perspective, I think Bert's assessment is spot on. However, and I would agree with Kevin, our charge was to figure out what the hell is it? What does it really cost to do this as a baseline? And I think this establishes what that baseline is. And to your point, depending on what the needs of the city are going forward, I think that really is a function of the commissioners based on this input, that the commissioners can say, okay, we now know with a high degree of assurity what the baseline is. that we know what's happening here, we know what's happening in sewer, we know what's happening in water. And we, as this group, have given input that, well, here's what we see, here's what we expect. This is why we're recommending a 4-year model to keep things consistent. And I think the profitability part within the city is their responsibility. I mean, obviously input from you and us and everyone says, well, I think it's this, but we're the cost side. So now coming to the commissioners and the mayor says, we're really, really sure this is what it costs to do this. Now you can go forward with a surety as to what you want to do to balance your aggregate budget and put in some multiplier on this rather than just winging it.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, I think you pretty well nailed it, Mike. I mean, it's going to present an issue for our public officials to consider and discuss.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's going to be a lively debate, but now we at least we have a rock solid base to start with, and I think that's very important.
And we have some history as to what has been used over the last several years out of the water wastewater funds on general fund kind of things, right?
Well, that's exactly right. It's tracked, and if one were to review the past audit reports, which are right on the internet, look at the fund activity of the water and wastewater fund, they get a pretty good clue of what kind of money we're talking about.
Right. Yeah, and I think the other part of this, and it was something I brought up at the last meeting, which I've been having trouble reconciling in my own mind of our peak and non-peak usage, which obviously is because we are a sure destination resort as opposed to peak, non-peak in the rest of the universe. On a national basis, peak versus non-peak, the peak period tends to go up by between 25 and 45% on a national basis. Ours goes up by 300 to 400%. So how do you take into account the profitability, Bert, from your standpoint, that all of those folks contribute to that? If you're a resident, you're not using 300 to 400% more of the water and wastewater sewer. It's coming from all the visitors that are coming here. So how do you somehow monetize that so everyone benefits, both the visitors and the residents? And I think your observation, based on what we've done, is exactly how you do that. So that you end up with a fair and equitable structure that's fair and equitable to the residents, but also takes into account the burden, for lack of a better term, of the influx of many, many more times than our core residential population. And how do you get money from that to fund the other operations of the city in a fair way? And in this case, it says, well, you use a lot of water, you use a lot of sewer. Well, that's where we extract that in a fair way.
Yeah, everything you said is right, Mike. I mean, basically, it's that going back to that peak usage concept of these people coming in and raising the cost. We have to build that plant to accommodate that size.
Right.
So.
Now, the one thing we did do differently, which I'm not sure everyone picked up on, is our model on the sewer side was a fully absorbed cost model. And that's why it ended up being there was no difference between peak and non-peak. All the costs are taken into account, but we came up with a singular rate. However, all of those expenses are incorporated into that. So it's still picked up in the equation, it's just done in a different fashion. It's been linearized as opposed to having peaks and non-peaks, it's there. And so that provides, from the one standpoint, a much more consistent approach. You know what your bill is, this is what you pay. You use a lot, you pay a lot. You don't use as much, you don't pay as much. And because of the fixed and non-fixed, the way Matt had done it was to try to capture all of that. So arguably, it means the city never gets in a position where they don't have enough money to pay the bills. That's really what we're doing. I'll shut up.
Yeah, no, that's good. Matt, can I just take you back on the breakout again of the ready to serve fee? So you took the total administrative costs, and then it looks like you took 30, whatever the percent by category, and I'll say category of in-city, out-of-city, and Breezewood as 3 categories. The percentage of each of those categories, and then are you trying to group it so that that category pays that percent of the ready-to-serve fee?
Yeah, it's kind of a hack way to do it, but that's basically what it is. I'm trying to focus on just what I would consider to be the in-city users portion of that. it's probably not the best way to calculate it, to be honest, because we would have a sense of what the number of bills are. Actually, we have it right here. So we could calculate what we project the revenue to be from that group, which is probably different than just taking 40% of it or 38% of it. So the number may look a little bit different if we were to do it that way, but you're right. What you've said is basically what I've tried to do here. So yeah, I was just trying to get at what I consider to be the in-city users portion of the ready to serve,
Okay.
and backing that out from the rate calculation.
Hang on, Matt, our screensaver just kicked in.
What was that?
Screensaver kicked in. Jay, did you have a question?
Mike, which set of rates were you using when you said it was 300% increase for peak season?
What I was looking at was the actual flow counts.
Oh, of course.
That's all I was looking at.
75% of our flow comes in those,
Right.
in the summer months, so naturally it would be
Gigantic.
much higher.
Right.
But in fact, the rates are not that much higher. They're 108 compared to 66, but I may not have the latest rate. $1.08 to 66 increase for the peak. Is that correct, Bert? Am I using old rates here on my chart?
I think you have old rates.
Yeah.
It's 210 and 310.
210 and 310?
Yes.
Okay, so that's even less. A buck. Okay.
I'm not sure where you're going with it.
I was getting away from 300%, but I didn't realize that you were.
I'm just looking at, I'm not looking at
talking-
dollars, it's
Yeah,
strictly,
you're not talking about flow.
it's strictly flow.
And before I stop talking, the out-of-town revenue is significant. And if we get that wrong, it's significant. I follow everything Bert said.
Well, right, and so what that says, if you didn't change anything, you still have significant revenue. But the risk
No.
is,
Significant percentage. If you make a mistake on the out-of-town condition of their infrastructure.
yeah, right,
I'm with
okay.
you on that.
Now we're right, that's my
You
concern.
don't want those surprises.
Right.
And I'm sorry, Don.
No, go ahead.
I can't remember the exact words from the asset management study that GHD did. Were they specific in their consideration of the condition of the out-of-town infrastructure? Or did they just?
They used the same methodology, so it was mainly based on age and,
Based on
and construction materials.
Okay.
So iron pipe versus plastic pipe
Okay.
versus whatever, and then the year it went in.
And the risk there is and Kevin knows this better than I do. You can use standard tables with regard to aging and of pipes, but depending on the water quality, depending on the environment, that there are a whole bunch of factors, what you end up with as the net diameter and the aging of the pipe can really be all over the map. And I would have to say in our environment, as opposed to an inland area that's, I don't want to say more normal, but because there's no normal based on soil. But there's probably higher risks. So the question is then, and we already know in the case of North Shores, there's already an issue. So how do we protect ourselves against that? And that's really where I was headed I was looking strictly at a cost basis, but once we establish a firm cost where we have a reasonable expectation of reliability or a low risk of surprises, can always happen, but at least we have confident we did a good analysis, then it falls over, as Bert's assessment is, okay, you're trying to maintain a revenue stream, and what do we multiply it by? What do we want to use as is it 2x, 3x, 4x? But if 3 years from now all hell breaks loose because we didn't do a good assessment technically, it's irrelevant what you charge because you may now be in the hole by would have been 20x, I don't know.
Yeah.
So it's really just taking a safe approach to it,
And I
a
think
precautionary approach.
Yeah, and Bert, I think what Bert says is right. You just don't want nasty surprises.
Right.
Well,
It's
the
nice
other,
to have cushion.
the other thing that we were very fortunate of this year in the budget process was the commissioners have dedicated some money toward actual assessments of water and sewer infrastructure. So
we made a
rather than,
determination.
rather than just kind of going, oh, well, by age, so it'd give us a better idea. So we're prioritizing where we want to start spending that money now, so that next fall we can actually start doing some of those assessments. And I don't know, but maybe we'll want to just go to a bunch of different areas to see how that particular area aligns with what GHD did in the asset management condition report. Haven't figured all that out yet, but at least we're going to take that first step and start doing some of those physical assessments rather than just doing it off of a table like Mike was saying. So we're very, very fortunate in that regard.
Ken, I just realized as you're talking about that, because we're sort of out of sync with assessment versus making a decision now based on divining what it's going to be. We don't have to set future rates for external to Rehoboth. They could be on a yearly, could they be on a yearly basis? In other words, we're setting things for what we think is a 4-year term on the sewer side and the water side in Rehoboth because we think we have a very good firm handle on what's going on. Do we have I'm gonna ask the mayor here, do we have the leeway to even consider it on an annual basis for the external as this data comes in, because it may have to rise faster than what Rehoboth is? Is that a possibility, or?
I would imagine it would be. I don't see anything that says we have to do it exactly the same.
You know, based on what I'm hearing, especially with now assessment's going to be done in the future, by relatively soon, I'd be a hell of a lot comfortable externally to Rehoboth proper with a 1-year rate until we get a handle on what's going on, because I personally hate decision-making when it's unknown.
Yeah, I don't know that we would have to go that short term. I mean, no one is out there thinking we're going to have a catastrophic failure in either North Shores or Breezewood.
Okay.
Now, I don't think we're at that, I don't think that risk, we're not at that level of
Okay.
risk.
But 2 would be more comfortable than 4.
Could be. Mm-hmm.
May I ask
Yeah.
Kevin a quick question? I'm not familiar with that engineering contractor whom you are at the moment sort of relying on, but I wanted to know, just because in our limited, well, not so limited experience, we just find Harry Caswell, I know he's one of the city's main contractors, if not the preferred contractor. Has he ever been asked to assess the infrastructure to North Shores and those issues to which you alluded? Have you, or going forward in the fall, are you considering hiring him as the person, since he's so familiar with this area?
Yeah, he has video capability.
He does.
Limited video capability. So, I mean,
But I mean,
it's
he's smart enough, he could probably
Yeah.
call in, like, you know, assistance from Dover or Salisbury or wherever they need superior.
Yeah, I don't know that we would sole source it that way. We would probably want to put something out on the street to get some competitive bids. And I don't know that, we use Caswell for a lot of things within the city. I don't know that we would use him for a programmatic kind of thing like that.
Okay, but I just thought.
When it comes time to fixing something,
Right.
yeah,
Well,
that
I mean, just
might be a guy to
because
call.
he's so intimately familiar with, you know,
Mm-hmm.
the depths of all the pipes. And
Sure,
the
been around a long
location.
time.
Unbelievable compared to any other plumber we've
Mm-hmm.
ever seen in this area.
Okay, yeah.
I just want to clarify, but the out-of-town accounts, are we talking about the Dewey, Henlopen Acres, North Shore?
We don't do water to Henlopen. We do North Shores and Breezewood. And then the north, I guess it's the
Different than the
northwest.
sewer then?
Correct.
So
Yes.
water
Correct,
is-
that's correct. We have a different footprint for water than we do with sewer.
Okay, because, so we're talking about water, so that'd be Henlopen Acres?
No.
No.
North Shores,
North
Breezewood,
Shore.
and then the Route 1 corridor on the west side, up to about Atlantic Liquors. Yeah, yeah. Kind of almost to the BB Clinic site out there on 24.
Okay, so that's beyond Breezewood. Breezewood
Correct.
is off of.
Breezewood is just a housing area.
Yeah.
And then
But you go further.
some of our other
west side?
out of town, it goes a little bit farther.
So we're responsible for all those water pipes?
Correct.
That's correct.
Yeah, we
So
provide them
the-
water.
The county is not involved here with those pipes in the water. So the
Correct.
county is not a backup as far as helping maintain these pipes.
Correct.
We have wells. Dewey Beach buys water from the city of Rehoboth's wells. It's billed by the county. So we sell basically wholesale. We have a pipe that basically runs up to where Brown's Seafood Market used to be. There's a meter up there. And, basically Dewey buys wholesale from us, and they charge their residents whatever they want to charge them.
They take care of their pipes.
They take care of their
Okay,
pipes.
so
Or the
that's-
county, I'm not sure what the relationship between Dewey and the county is on that, from that point on, but, they don't have meters in their town of Dewey Beach, so it's a whole different model.
So we're just talking about the water pipes, and we're directly selling to North Shores and Greece.
Correct.
Yeah, they're just our out of town.
And some others, and others along the Route 1 corridor,
And the big.
and West Rehoboth Avenue, and, Canal Place, and those kind of.
And what are the
YMCA.
ages of those
Yeah.
pipes? Like Breezewood, 1970s, are they, those
Uh,
the original pipes?
Well,
We can look
the
them
old-
up. Yeah,
the
there's some
early-
newer ones, but yeah.
Around 75 is when they developed Breezewood, I think, somewhere in that time frame. And at the time, Breezewood they had their own well. And they became a customer city when they wanted to turn over the facility to the city of Rehoboth. So that well was their original well. And so City of Rehoboth took them in as a customer. And I think that's part of the reason why you have the 1.5% rate, because they already had a well. They'd already paid for it. So that's why you don't see 2 times the normal rate.
Okay, and then how are the pipes along Highway 1 on the west side? Are those newer pipes because they've done various road work and they put in newer pipes?
Again, I have to look specifically, which ones we're talking about. but-
And those are in the asset management study, right?
Right.
So that's fine.
Okay, and I guess the other thing, Bert, is, so we've been doing this for 30 years or so, okay, right? So now, I would assume in like the water enterprise fund, like, there's a surplus coming in. If it were me, I would be setting aside a certain amount on reserve for repairs. And then I take maybe another certain portion and make that available for the general fund of the city?
Well, we've
So-
accumulated quite a bit of cash in impact fees for the water fund. So I think there's several $1 million in a CD for every time somebody hooks up to the system, they pay an impact fee.
And you hold that in reserve, and is that sort of the
It's
city
restricted.
self-insurance fund for?
Well, it's restricted money. We can't go out and buy bicycles with it or anything like that. I mean, we've got to use it for those purposes.
And those specified purposes are
The
the sewer, the
the
water
needs
system
of the water system,
per se, repairs and capital improvements.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't read the code on exactly what the parameters are, what the language is, but it's restricted money for the purpose of the water fund.
And there's a couple $1 million there,
Couple $1 million there.
making some interest.
Yeah, 2.5% now.
Which has an effect on the concerns we've just been talking about. And you said Dewey is like a wholesale customer. So the agreement with Dewey is totally separate and apart from anything that we're discussing, or
Well,
it
that's right.
could be affected by it.
Well, the wholesale rate that we sell to Dewey, I'm thinking, I'm kind of going out on a limb now, but I'm thinking it's somewhere in the $1.60, $1.70 range per 1,000 gallons. So it's lower than,
But there's an ability to change that.
it's a negotiated rate. It was changed about, I think it's changed just a few years ago, but only by pennies. But it's negotiated through the county, because the county, it's they handle that district. So,
So there's less likelihood that it'll be affected by anything that's decided as a result of this discussion.
it's independent, I think, other than the fact that, well, I have to retract that a little bit. It's independent from the rates that Matt's working on, but I mean, as far as our business model of revenue sources, it has a big impact, because we bill them every month. and-
That's my point.
And it's a chunk of change.
How much do we get a year from Dewey, Bruce?
Gosh, Jay, you have to ask all the hard questions. I'm gonna say, I'm gonna have to look at I hate to just throw numbers out without
I
looking.
have the numbers if you want to count. I can't find it. I'm sorry to do this to you.
Hey, it's nice to have people interested.
Amazing what you find out at these meetings.
You have you caught people's attention, I mean, with the 30%, 60%, which is, would this be all time, like, I'm comparing to the WSC rate increases, which, that's a year and a half ago, which is kind of right time to do that. Just, I mean, I have neighbors who are near apoplectic over this, and you know, what, they're, all of us would love to conserve water.
Sure, Jenny.
Some of that control over it, you know, you have a little bit of a lawn and you haven't installed an irrigation meter. But just to give everyone, an example, WSSC, which held, lengthy hearings on this, because the CPI, as all of you know, over the last decade or so, has been extremely low, and there's been deflation in like gasoline prices, dairy prices. So it's hard for consumers to wrap their heads around massive percentage increases in their basic costs. WSSC in early,
That's significant.
well, mid 2017, as an example, raised water charges, it's of course 5,000 gallons, by about 4%. This was the first rate increase in 4 years. And they raised sewer rates, which were about 30% higher than water rates, which it seems to be common given the, I guess, the cost of treating the wastewater. They raised sewer rates actually by a little less, by a little under 3%. So just to throw that out there, I'm just a little concerned that the overall sudden rate increases, rather than phasing them in over maybe a 3 to 5 year period, it's just so it's unusual, let's just say, to have such draconian rate increases take effect. In this case, in theory, they took effect 3 weeks ago, or on April 1st. So just if anyone's interested in this WSSC bill, I could, it shows the rate increase. It actually took effect in the middle of at the time we owned a house in Montgomery County, Maryland. It actually happened to take effect toward the middle of a quarter. Went from $4.67 per 1,000 gallons, and it increased to $4.88 per 1,000 gallons, if anyone's interested. This was at the time we had a household of like 3. Our kid who was at UVA was home during part of this period working. But it was sort of a household of, on average, 3.2 people. Tony, are you interested? I don't know if anyone's interested in this. And there is, Kevin, you are absolutely right, there is a Chesapeake Bay restoration fee, which is a fixed cost per household of a little under $15. And then some, not so much access each month, but just they call it account maintenance, and it's a quarterly fee, but I guess it doesn't really matter what you call it. It's just access to the system.
Right.
They're calling it administrative, and infrastructure investment is a fixed fee per account of a little under $12.
So what was the volume on that bill?
Well, that particular bill, because this was summertime, we had some watering of a lawn.
But gallons.
Sorry, because we usually were around 10,000 gallons per quarter, like in the winter. This was 14,000 gallons this particular quarter.
And how much was the bill?
And we paid $204.89. That included all the account maintenance fees, Chesapeake Bay restoration fees, which was high for us. Like, we have an earlier bill that was $150 because our usage was only 11,000 gallons during that 3 months. So, yeah, I mean, these rates, I actually compared them to when we first moved here. These rates were actually slightly higher than City of Rehoboth rates for similar, like 10,000 gallon usage over 3 months. But then, I still have to compare to the summer. There were no peak versus they didn't bother with peak versus non-peak. In fact, when they were discussing peak versus non-peak in that area of Montgomery County, it was more on electricity, like like whether to charge less for it at night, to encourage people literally to run their laundry at 12 midnight, you know, because it would be cheaper from, I think, 10 PM to 6 AM or something. I don't think they ever had any peak versus non-peak water in mind. So, basically it was a little more expensive than the rates here in Rehoboth Beach in the beginning of, say, 28 or during 2018. But with these proposed changes, you're taking yourselves to approximately 45 to 50% higher than WSSC, which had this rate increase in 2017. And in Googling online, I don't believe WSSC is anticipating another rate increase until 2020. The one in 2017 is in effect still right now.
I can't take exception to your numbers, but I mean, 14,000 gallons in the city of Rehoboth Beach, you know, is gonna be somewhere under $120, right?
Even after the 30 and 60%?
That's what the 30%, yeah.
Okay.
So the fact that, I hate to get into kind of the argument about, you know, what a percentage means to whomever, but if you just look at what the projected cost to the homeowner is gonna be for, in this case, 20,000 gallons for the year, is gonna be, you know, for a 1-inch meter is $121.
Oh, so if you use 5,000 per quarter, you're saying 20,000 total?
20,000 total is $121. So to say that 14,000 is 204, and that's a quarterly, and you haven't paid your, you know, your service fees each of those quarters. So, you know, without knowing the business model and without having all the back, you know, it's hard to make that comparison.
Right, it's making Rehoboth look pretty.
You say 30% sounds like an awful lot of money, and WSSC only raised it 4%. Okay, but look what they had going in. So it's hard to do. You know, we could argue each of those every day with every town you want to come up with. So we were just trying to come up with what's fair for what we have here. And you know, from day one, it's been, if you use more, you should pay more. So we really focused in on trying to get you know, tie most of our costs, our revenues, to match our costs, but base it mainly on how much you're using. So that's kind of where we've.
Okay, just a clarification, the line where you referenced the 20,000 gallons and the $121.33, that $121.33 is that quarterly, annual?
That's annual.
It's an annual bill.
Yeah,
Because it's based on those gallons. So we assume that 20,000 gallons was over the year, you know, so we've got 4 times of the quarterly service fee and then an amount based upon the usage. And then in this calculation, we used, I think, 2/3 peak, 1/3 non-peak, so we could get the, you know, the peak rate.
And the service fee is quarterly?
Quarterly.
Thank you.
So, and reading that graph, I just want to make sure. And the very top line, so that 273 is our per 1,000 gallon charge in the non-peak time. So we're charging, even with the 30% increase,
Correct.
we're charging $2.73
For 1,000 gallons.
And in peak time, within summertime, when we're hit with the tourists and all that, then the rate goes up to $4.03.
Right.
So that's.
That's what the 30% does too.
And that's what we're doing on top of
And
the
it-
graph.
Correct, and then the 30% on top of the current $9.50 service charge takes it to $12.35.
One of the, Kevin, the comment that everyone, the comment that you just made, one of the difficult things when you try to compare rates just on the surface, when you get into the details on all of these around the country as an aggregate, not knowing what a particular system is and the status of their system and their indebtedness and everything else, rates around the country actually vary by 10 to 1 for water.
By the way, this was water and sewer, not just water.
Yeah.
Okay, so you got it. So-
That's part
Well,
of
no,
the
what I'm
problem.
saying is the water rates alone vary by 10 to 1 across the country. There's a difference between, and sewers vary by 9 to 1. So it's unbelievably gigantic. And what goes into those are so many different factors that are totally unique to the environment and where they are. So it gets exceedingly difficult to do 1-to-1. And so in our particular case, the approach we took, as Kevin pointed out, was we know what our costs are, and let's fully cost out the model for quote, us. And then, as Bert points out, then the issue is one of, okay, it's also a profit center, and how do we deal with that? So it's, It's a lot of work. That's the best I can describe it.
And once
come up with fair
we
number.
come up with an answer that we think works on water, then we have to kind of almost go back to the sewer and say, okay, given this discussion with water, are we consistent? Is everything, are we still happy with the wastewater?
Yes.
Yeah, but just for the record, to clarify, that bill that we face is typically between $125 and $210 per quarter, covered both water, sewer, which they just assume 1-to-1 as you do, if you use a gallon of water, you need a gallon of wastewater, and all of the Chesapeake Bay account maintenance fees, everything. That was it, and you paid, well, as you do, water and sewer together. So, when I did the comparison versus the Rehoboth Beach water and sewer, which I had for like, our case was one time was 11,000 gallons. Before these new 30-60% rate increases, WSSC was slightly Rehoboth Beach was slightly less expensive than WSSC, but these proposed rate increases, at least the way I calculated it at home, brought us to about 45 to 50% higher than WSSC.
Okay.
But you're right, there are, like you said, there are what, 100 different, municipalities just in the mid-Atlantic, near here.
And the
trying to compare.
magnitude of scale of a WSSC with a,
Right.
and they send their sewer to Blue Plains, so, you're 350 million gallons a day versus our 1 million gallons a day.
Right.
So
Yeah, we're lucky that Kevin
Quantity of
worked for
scale.
DC Water, right, so you actually have familiarity with a lot of other systems, so that's helpful.
Did you get one of these rate sheets that Kevin passed
Yes,
around? That you
thank
can compare local rates? I think
Yes.
that's real informative.
That's probably more
To say
relevant,
that
yeah.
right here, of the range of what we've had for water and sewer rates, and how Rehoboth has always been a deal. I mean,
Yeah.
Rehoboth has always been very economically and equitably and fairly managed, so, we're thankful for that, that's what we're starting on.
Yeah, it has a Tidewater payer. Yeah. After looking at all this, I'm like, what? But yeah.
You may have to move.
For a commute.
We're in Bert's house.
Move out, I can't pay the water bill.
Oh, too good.
There was a time we didn't have water meters.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, so do I. Times change.
And Matt's sitting there going, you coming back to me?
Yeah. All right. So what are the thoughts on kind of the ready to serve fee? Let's try to get, we like, breaking it out by, I guess the percentage of the admin fee, or just divvy it up by the 20,000, 23,000 bits?
Kevin, just so you're aware, as some of that discussion was taking place, I did a recalc on the cell that's highlighted. Instead of taking a portion of what we're calculating, I did it actually based on the number of bills that we're attributing to in-city customers. And that's what this amount is, and that's currently being highlighted, that 146 number.
Right.
It's a little bit higher than the other one. It was around 117,000. By making that change, we're up to 146. I thought that made more sense, because that's actually basing it on what we would expect based on the number of bills.
I think what's nice is even if it's wrong by a little too high, a little bit too low, at least it has a rational derivation, and you know where it came from and why it is, and if the commissioners or even we, if we want to fine tune it a bit, I think the main thing is it captures the bulk of it. So from a factual basis, it's fair and reasonable for the in-town piece. So I think the answer is yes, from my standpoint.
And if I read that, Matt, it's 13 something is kind of that rough number.
Yeah, this number right here that I just highlighted
Right.
is the number that we currently have calculated for FY20.
Okay.
That's a per bill number, and that's also assuming that all water customers get the same ready to serve charge on the bill.
Right.
So that would mean that out-of-city customers would pay the same as in-city customers.
Okay. So
Which
that
goes a little bit against what is the current situation on the rate sheet.
Right, that's right. Because
Because even for those meter-related charges that are currently being billed, they're not the same when you look at in-city and out-of-city. Actually,
correct. It's the same difference, though. Yeah, I mean, it's the same 2 times for the out of town and 1.5 times
Right.
for Braidwood. So,
And so the 1335 compares to what's on this, on the sheet here as to the 1235.
1235.
So it's not that much of a difference.
It's in the ballpark, so I think the analysis appears sound. And if we looked at a out of town at, you know, it's at the old, then the 30% would be 24 something a month. So if we
Right.
decided we wanted to have a higher rate on the out of town and apply it to the service fee as well, you know, we're right in that range we had thought we would be in.
And I'll go back to my, I think, recurring question about what time period we use in calculating all this. It looks like we're now using the same 2016, 2017 on the water as we did on the sewer. And we're gonna stick with that all the way through, or we're gonna get some updated numbers at some point that's what.
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, I have a draft email out that I was planning on sending to Kevin. Actually, he doesn't know this yet, but once I got comfortable with the number of bills on the water side,
Right.
which morning. But basically, I thought it made sense to take a look at how the number of bills that we've calculated would compare to what the city currently, or maybe in the last year or so, the number of bills that have actually gone out, just to see how on target these numbers are, and maybe based on what we learn, we can make an adjustment. But
Okay, yeah, we'll do that.
yeah, I thought that definitely made sense, because this is based on a specific number of bills, obviously. And if the number of bills that are currently being billed over the last year or so, or what we think might happen in the next year or so,
Right.
Does not approach the amount that we're using here, then, you know, we would want to know that.
Correct.
Because then we can make whatever adjustment we deem is necessary.
Good, thanks.
But I think that's definitely worthwhile. It obviously took me a little time to come up with a water bill number that I was comfortable with, but now that I have that, I think it makes sense to ask the city to provide that information for us.
Yep. Good call.
So you will be getting that email. I'll catch
I can't wait. I can't wait.
How many of those customers out of town are on Route 1? Because that's a lot, if we're just talking about the out-of-town customers, 2,600.
Out of town is North Shores, Route 1.
But,
Mhm.
but where I see where Breezewood is broken out, and that's 194.
Mhm.
And then there's 2,600, are those mostly in North Shores? Or how many are on Route 1?
So just,
North Shore's got 200, about 230.
yeah, so if you said 250 and they get 4 bills, so there's 1,000.
I'm just talking about accounts, number of customers, not how many bills are due.
Okay.
Where are they coming from? The outlets, that's one of the customers right there.
The outlets. So we have a
Anybody
lot of
on Route 1.
business there.
Canal
I'm just
Place,
wondering-
all these little townhouses are out in West Rehoboth, that Lewis development's
Because I guess
there.
there's just more customers or accounts out there that are commercial on Route 1 than I would have realized, that they're not all residential. And to that, because I would think North Shores doesn't have as many people as Rehoboth proper.
No.
Yeah, so that means that a lot of those accounts have to be on Route 1.
Right.
Okay. Didn't know we had those kind of customers.
Yeah.
Starbucks
Yeah.
and Rise Gym, are they, I think someone said those. are-
Starbucks.
Rise Gym.
The one on
at
Rehoboth,
the
yeah.
perimeter, like at
Oh.
the very perimeter of our customer base.
I don't know if I can read that level of detail on the map, but yeah.
Well, actually, I think it was Harry Caswell who told me that. I haven't
It's gotta be true then, right?
That's what he said.
Gotta be true. Yeah.
He said, and nothing he said has ever not been true.
No, I'm not it's casting any aspersions whatsoever, because we use him a
Oh, no,
lot.
I understand. I just think he was just trying to give me perspective as to where it ends, the
Yeah.
jurisdiction of Rehoboth.
So you-
Rehoboth?
Yeah, like Rise Gym,
The
you
other
mentioned
side-
Rise Gym and
The other
Starbucks.
side of the canal bridge.
So if you want, you can see it, it's hard because this is just a black and white, but when we finish, you can kind of come up and just, you can see the areas that we service outside of town. So it's here, if you want to look at it after we get done. Matt, is there anything specific you need decisions from us on in order to proceed? Or anything you'd like to get some guidance from us on?
I'm currently writing up some what I consider to be the key decision points that we're kind of talking about right now.
Okay.
So just one sec.
We went through about 6 or 8 of them last meeting, and I don't know that we got resolution on any, but we threw them out there for things we need to consider, right? In peak, non-peak rates, whatever the factor would be for out of town, whatever the factor would be for Breezewood, those kind of things. So I think we're still
Right.
kind of in the development mode of what we think is appropriate.
From my perspective, those got more complicated rather than simpler.
It's okay too. We want to look at a 2-year option. Last week we kind of said, well, we just keep it the same, but there may be some goodness in looking at maybe a 2-year
2-year
rate for the out of.
for the external, the out of
Yeah.
town.
Yeah, it almost seems like it calls for, if we like the 4-year for the in-town and we say potentially 2-year for out of town, but it doesn't have to be linked, need flexibility based on
Right,
additional information.
right. I would agree with that.
Well, my plan would be that whatever approach we want to move forward with from here, that I would continue to carry the multiple options even for the out of town
Okay.
rate, out of city rates. So
Okay, good.
at least that's my plan, to allow you to continue to have the option to look at multiple options rather than just targeting one.
Okay.
Good.
I think that makes the most sense. I mean, because that clearly has had value to me, to the group so far.
Right.
To be able to look at multiple. And considering the workbook is constructed that way already, I think we should continue to do that.
Yeah, I agree.
And it was helpful as we got to the end
Yeah,
of what we thought our consideration was on the wastewater, and then all of a sudden it was like, whoops.
Right, right. And then Bert and I still owe you a review of the cost allocation tables, both. We just wanted to relook at those one more time.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'd welcome that.
Yep.
All right. So, getting back at what I consider to be kind of the decision points. They're not decisions, a strong word. Decisions aren't being made right now, but at least an approach moving forward from right now. Right here in this area. So I'll just highlight this in red so you can see it a little bit better. So I presented to you a methodology that I thought, kind of high level made sense, at least to me, to come up with in-city rates. And it was based on certain costs, but it was based on a portion of the overall cost. It's not necessarily what we consider to be the cost to serve in-city users. It's really just determining a percentage to take of the total cost is what we did. But this first question is, should we base in-city rates on a portion of cost to recover? Seems like the general consensus was yes on that. I didn't hear any no's or anything against what I did. So, I guess I'm planning on continuing to use that. Does everyone agree with that? That's this question right here.
Yeah. No strong objections yet, so.
Okay.
That's one
How
way
do
of
we
thinking.
come up with a percentage of cost to use for the in-city rate? I used the 37.97% because that was the percentage of billings in that data set that I had that are tied to in-city users.
As good as anything right now, huh, while we think about it. Okay?
Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make that configurable. So, on
Yeah.
that rate setting objectives tab that we have in the workbooks now.
Right.
Where kind of, that's kind of the, really the decision area.
Uh-huh.
Where you set certain things that are configurable, so that it flows throughout the workbook. So what I'll do is I'll create a percentage there, and I'll caveat it to say this is what we're using, but it can change. Obviously, it can change.
Okay.
All right, that seems like a good approach there. All right, so what about out of city rate? What about that one? Do we want to also set an out of city rate based on a portion of the cost that we're trying to recover, or should we simply just calculate the in-city rate and then double it? I'm not saying double it, but a factor to have the out of city rate relate to the in-city rate.
Okay. You know the answer. You know the answer is we need to look at both of them, so we can see which one we want to use. I think it would be helpful to see what that, if you as a calculation, what it would be versus what it would just be at 2. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no free lunch. I mean, it's.
Yeah.
And I would have said before that my answer potentially changed after discussion today, so it's like both is good.
Yeah, I think in that case we do. And then I guess we need to, philosophically, we need to discuss our thought on Breezewood with respect to, we're all pretty or I think we're pretty confident that the reason they're at 1.5 and less than the rest of our out of town is because they gave us the well and some land and some easements or whatever out there. Is that in perpetuity, or we've done 30 years of that break now? Is it time to figure out a different rate?
Well, they may still have a different rate than everybody else, but it is whatever number of years it's been since the original agreement.
Right. It may not be 1.5 anymore.
And it may be something higher than that.
Maybe just
based
an
on the
out-of-town
reality.
rate.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we can think about that one.
So
again,
yes, no.
look at what that number calculates out to be based upon a usage percentage or whatever is probably important to look at.
Well, I don't know.
Okay.
On the Breezewood thing,
So it sounds to me like the same methodology for the out of city. Do one based on cost, and then also do one where you can just set a factor based on the in-city rate.
Yeah, Bert's got a caveat to that here.
well,
sorry.
the only other thing I could think about, Matt, on the Breezewood, other than the fact that they turned over our well and their infrastructure to us, I'm not sure what the requirements are, and Kevin probably would have to comment on that as far as, how, is it easier to serve a customer at Breezewood than it is all these Route 1 customers scattered all over the place? And does that justify, them possibly getting a lower rate than, say, a Route 1 customer who's a commercial establishment? And I don't know from a technical support perspective whether there is a difference, but I know one thing: if I was a plumber, it'd be a lot easier to go to Breezewood and do my work than go out on Route 1.
But you might wanna look at the age of the pipes too.
Sure.
That you maybe need to collect a little more. And keep a profit going.
Well, I think everything's on the table. You're right
Yeah.
about that. But I guess what I'm really saying is that one's a residential area,
Yep.
and there are a lot of considerations, rather than just going ahead and saying, okay, everybody's paying twice as much.
What justifies them getting a lower rate compared to other out of town?
Exactly.
They did
Right.
well, they are easier to service, but I don't know we wanna go below the current.
No, I'm not their advocate, but I mean, I'm just thinking of fairness.
We go to pump breaks down and refrigerator.
We take care of the pumps. So.
Yeah. But we really like their land. We like where they are.
Something bothers me though, and I'm sorry, keep thinking
Sure.
of. Dewey Beach contributes 35% of our total revenue. What kind of per 1,000 gallon rate are they getting? It might be fun to renegotiate that contract.
got two.
Well, we did negotiate it within the last 2-3 years, and I have a list, basically shows the trends from what they've been billed over the last, and I can provide that, but it's under $2, and I'm thinking that right now, I don't know what their rate is, Kevin, whether it's in $1.60 or $1.80, I don't know, I'd have to look at it, but I've got the information.
What the cost of servicing, supplying Dewey Beach is
Much less,
expensive.
much less.
So it goes to a central metering station,
Exactly.
and
But
to those of you that don't know it, several years ago, before it's as busy as it is today, there was a master meter, and the water has got to be metered both ways because it goes to their water tank, and when we service our tanks, sometimes the water flows from Dewey Beach towards us. But actually, at one point in time, not that many years ago, 20-some years ago, the meter didn't move at all because when Kevin lived down there flush flow or whatever, it didn't even see it. So then there was a series of small meters, 6-inch meters, to let it go one way and another one to come back, and that's how we got down to much better billing. Last my checking and knowing about it, it was working very well to be reflective of the water that was being used, but that's it's just past Robinson Drive in the pit over there is where the meters are located. It works very well. Minimal work for Rehoboth and minimal work for Dewey Beach. They take care of it well. All we care is that it gets paid.
Right, good, that's a good point, Walter, but I think the meter's getting pretty old, that main meter down there that measures. And the county controls that meter. So it's kind of like our customer has control of the meter, right?
That's, like you said, negotiable.
Are they tampering with the meter?
I would never suggest the county would do that, but I mean, the point of it is, they have no, I mean, I think we could probably, do we know how old that meter is? Is it?
Yeah, Robert does, yeah. I'm not familiar.
I don't know that we can require them to replace it or whether it needs to be replaced. I don't know enough about it, but that's the arrangement.
But if we're expecting, if we're doing capital improvements in the water system, and that's the reason for these increases, now, so wouldn't that, an increase go to Dewey because we're doing capital improvements? Wouldn't they have to contribute to that capital improvement, and so there'd be an increase in their rate?
Possibly. I mean, I think everything's, but
Or
we got to
would they have
negotiate the rate with Dewey too, and I'm not sure what Dewey's options are. I guess we're the only option, but.
But we're trying to, generate enough revenue for the cost. If Dewey's a big customer, it would seem maybe they also have to help pay for the capital improvement.
Well, I don't think anybody argued. I think it makes sense.
So at the moment, as of April 1st, 2019, Dewey is 30% increase
No.
was not taking effect for the Dewey customers, well, for Dewey.
Totally
Is that
separate,
true?
totally separate agreement.
Totally.
Yeah,
So
so in fact, the way it is now, they weren't gonna be subject to any sort of rate increase.
well, they're not going to have a 30% increase because, like I say, I have the rate charts and the trends over the years on what the rates are.
Do you have any idea approximately what rate increase they were gonna see in 2019? Like, are we talking 5%, 10%? I mean, I'm assuming you're implying it's much
I
lower
think
than
it's
30%.
single digits, but I think
Yeah, that
best thing
doesn't,
for
to
me.
me, seem equitable just off the top, but I understand there are mitigating factors like the fact that the county maintains their pipes and all that. But,
Yeah.
it just seems odd that, 30% for some people and single digits
Well, I
for
bet you.
Dewey.
Yeah, I bet you the county did some serious calculations though when they negotiated the rate because they it would be logical to take all those extra costs that we have as far as meters and maintenance and everything like that and kind of go through an exercise similar to what we're going through here and back out all those additional costs that we have that they wouldn't have, and then arriving, if they figure that 60% of those costs of our bill are related to things that they don't have to incur a cost for, and and as been said, it's pretty easy just to run. We've got a relatively new pipe running down there because they did the road a few years ago, I don't know, within the last 10 years. So it's pretty simple operation. We've got excess water and they need water. And, but I think the county would, if we tried to increase their rate double digits, I think they'd have a response, and they could
Oh,
probably
absolutely.
base it
In
on.
the same way that people around here are a little bit nervous about these,
Yeah, and they would base it,
more, they're very large,
Yeah.
double-digit increases.
but they could
For
back in.
sewer especially.
Yeah, I'm sure they can back into the calculation and say, here's why we think it's that rate.
Is it part of the thinking that our rates are going up on water, that they're also going up for a few years to take care of the capital improvements and then they come back down?
We took it out 12 years. I don't know that there was a big dip back down. Because most of the water are more programmatic kind of things. You don't have a $40 million outfall you're trying to pay, or a $30 million plant you're trying to operate and maintain. It's much smaller scale. So it's kind of flat once you get that 30% across the board kind of increase. Then it kind of stays flat for the 12 years. There are a little ups and downs, but not nearly like sewer.
But in the sewer, we're expecting several years of high rates and then they can go down once we absorb and pay for the,
They go down, yeah. So just real quickly on the sewer, we have a nice step right away. And then in about 4 or 5 years, we got another really nice step. And then after that, it starts to trickle back down. But we're back, the loan payments, the SRF payments, they go on for 20 years. So those big ticket items spread over 20 years is still a pretty big
People
number.
complain about rates going up, and if they're going to go down, I mean, I think that would be important to let people know that if we expect the sewer rates to go down.
Certainly the sewer, I don't know if you saw the graphs that we have on the sewer side. So, it's a step, big spike in the middle. And that's why we kind of looked at, let's do it lock in a rate over a period of time. So it's not, stepping like this, like
Right, but
each
that's
year.
not happening on the water.
Not nearly as dramatic. It's just kind of once you go up, then that's, like I said, there are more programmatic things on the water side as opposed to big, large capital expenses. So you don't see as many spikes because of that.
I'm not trying to play the devil's advocate here, but from an economic point of view, I think the prospect that 8 years from now, things will level off, if not maybe diminish a little tiny bit. For most people, their thinking is more short term. And I think at least my neighbors, where I live near Grove Park, are more focused on these draconian increases that happen in what the short term to them is like the next 3 to 5 years. To the point that some of them are threatening to move out of Rehoboth because, they have that option. They don't.
Move to an area serviced by Tidewater, it's a bigger.
Well, I don't think they're planning to move, west. I think they're planning to move more like south, like Florida. I don't know if that's what they're speaking about, but
Good luck.
I'm a little
Yeah,
concerned with the increases. Yeah, they do level off eventually, but that time.
There's all the rate survey for Florida.
It's
They're
hard
telling them
to-
to pick out their town. Well, we've done this research for months now on each individual place we could find data on. And Florida puts out a nice little booklet for the state, for every utility in their state. So they're more than welcome to come look at our data.
Well, if public schools alone would be a reason, in my case, why I wouldn't ever really consider Florida, at least for the next 15 months. But all kidding aside here, just these rate increases are sort of more imminent, and that's what people are looking at. The fact that maybe 8 years from now it starts to level off, I'm not sure is reassuring people as much as you might like it to.
Okay. Matt, what's next on your list? We got about 5 minutes.
Well, it sounds to me like Breezewood, we're taking the same approach as out of city.
Yep.
For what that rate might look like. That's this right here.
Yep.
So I think we're good there. The only other thing that I had on my list that I can think of off the top of my head is what to do about the ready to serve. Does it make sense that out-of-city customers would have a different ready-to-serve charge than in-city customers?
It makes sense to me. I mean, it's kind of always been that way, and yeah. If
Okay.
whatever, and if it's based on whatever percentage that calculation comes out to be, so be it.
Yeah.
Or if we decide it needs to be a flat, whatever, 2%, then I would apply that same logic. I think I want to apply that same logic to the ready-to-serve fee.
Okay.
I wanna
And
see the numbers.
Bruce, as always, wants to see the numbers.
All right.
He keeps us
And then what
honest.
about
Right, he keeps us honest.
Breeze with the same approach, I'm guessing, right? I mean,
Yes.
they kind of go hand in hand, so.
Yes, yeah.
All right, well, I feel like I have enough to move forward. So I'll plan on doing those things.
Okay.
I gotta figure out the best way to do it, though. It's possible we end up with 2 water workbooks. One with the approach that is cost-based for out of city and Breezewood,
Okay.
and one with that is simply a factor. But I'll see if I can do it in the same workbook. We'll see.
Okay.
That's gonna be mine, at least.
And our next meeting is Thursday at 1 o'clock.
Duplicate of this meeting.
Same time, same bat station. Still to be determined, you know, Roger is back in country and in town next week. If he wants kind of a get up to speed session, I'll contact you, Matt, and see when that time would work for him and you. Just because he's been out of pocket for several months now. But he did say he was coming next week.
Okay.
All right, any other comments or questions from the audience? Yeah, Don.
Kevin, I understand you're coming to the homeowners association.
Oh, I sure am.
I bet you're really looking forward
I
to
just
it.
can't wait. Because, you know, you guys do yours on a long weekend in the spring, and Country Club Estates does theirs on a long weekend in the fall. So I just love it.
Messing up your
The
long
middle
weekend.
day of the long weekend. I
hope
just
you
love
take
it.
some comp time.
What's that? But yes, I'll be there.
Well, when you're there, it was very helpful when you presented information at the workshop and gave some ideas of what rates might look like, what bills might look like, okay? I assumed you maybe were going to do some of that.
I hadn't planned on having handouts.
Well, you had a PowerPoint.
Oh, okay. Oh, because we're at
Oh,
camp.
you were doing it in here. You
We're
had,
at camp, right? We're not out. I'm thinking we're out at one of the parks.
Yeah, your
Okay.
camp, I'm not sure they get one.
Okay.
But I just think,
Did-
like, what you showed us, what we saw at the workshop was the estimated cost, the bottom line on bills projected on just a 1-year bill forecast, okay? And then you tried to show us some on maybe 3 years, which you
Yeah.
couldn't see because it's fuzzy. But now I hear you're going to do the billing on a 4-year projection, is that correct?
That's going to be our recommendation on the sewer side.
I think it'd be very helpful if we could see some sample bills, what that will actually do to your bill. So if you.
Okay, it had totally escaped me that we're doing it indoors at a facility that we might be able to do something like that. So I'll talk with Sharon and see what she wants to try.
If you had, or I think that helps people understand where things are headed or what they're looking like, and so if that was possible.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll see what the boss says.
Okay. Okay. Throwing it out.
Anything else from the group? Anybody else from the table? All righty, thanks everybody. We'll see you next Thursday. Thanks, Matt.